In a bid to put more pressure on the government of Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro, the United States has imposed sanctions on the state-owned oil company PDVSA. The new attack was announced by the U.S. Secretary of Treasury, Steven Mnuchin.
Today, Treasury took action against Venezuela's state-owned oil company, PDVSA, to help prevent the further diversion of Venezuela's assets by former President Maduro. The United States is holding accountable those responsible for Venezuela's tragic decline. We will continue to use all of our diplomatic and economic tools to support interim President Guaido, the National Assembly, and the Venezuelan people's efforts to restore their democracy.
And the U.S. threats against Venezuela are also going further than just diplomatic action. Questioned by a journalist, the U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton has not disregarded another possible intervention in the country.
Look, the president has made it very clear on this matter that all options are on the table.
Earlier, Venezuela's Foreign Affairs Minister Jorge Arreaza said they are moving ahead with plans to set up a Bureau of Mutual Interest to replace the U.S. Embassy in Caracas. In a press conference, Arreaza said that their interest is to open a common channel of dialogue, which could be achieved with the Mutual Interest Bureau. Last Wednesday, President Nicolas Maduro ordered U.S. diplomats in the country to leave within 72 hours.
To work towards having a mutual interest office, since as we will not have an embassy here in the United States in Venezuela or embassy in Venezuela in the United States, to have at least an interest, a bureau for mutual interest to keep a dialogue open with the United States and to minimal immigration movements between these two nations.
Arreaza also insisted that the Bolivarian government is open to dialogue with the opposition.
Maduro is willing to talk, and within 15 minutes we get together, and if it's tomorrow we shall get together and have a meeting, and especially with the people from the opposition in Venezuela at any moment that they wish.
Meanwhile, the armed forces are preparing to defend Venezuela in the wake of a U.S.-backed attempted coup.
They are not prepared to look back. They will move forward with their commander-in-chief, President Nicolas Maduro, whatever the circumstance. The military does not tire of reiterating their support for the constitution and the will of the Venezuelan people, who chose to re-elect Maduro on the 20th of May last year.
There is no time to retreat. There is no time to bend our knees. We will keep the homeland free, independent and sovereign.
The state is under siege, a coup is underway, and the armed forces are preparing for military exercises that will take place from the 10th to the 15th of February.
I feel like another soldier of this army. I feel like a soldier of the country. They want the army to take part in the coup. Will you? No! Or do you follow the Constitution? Are you pro-imperialism? Or are you anti-imperialism? Never traitors, always loyal.
The opposition of Juan Guaido, the self-proclaimed interim president, calls on the military daily to rebel and support the coup.
I'm talking to you, Venezuelan soldier. This is the time to be on the side of the Constitution. It's not the time to back up. It's not the time to disrespect the Venezuelan people. Soldier of this country, today I give you an order.
So far, that order has been disobeyed. A leaflet titled Amnesty Law was distributed. In it, the opposition gives soldiers and police officers assurances of a pardon. But for now, the army chooses to stand by Maduro.
Hundreds of Turkish students have gathered in Istanbul to show their support for the Venezuelan government. Students protested against the interference attempts in Venezuela pushed by the U.S. administration and its allies. Demonstrators also showed their support for President Nicolas Maduro and his stand against imperialism.
There were elections held and Maduro won and is in power. And even though he won, the U.S. decided to acknowledge the government of Parliament President Guaido, who is currently making a coup. It shows clearly that the U.S. wants to take the land that belongs to Venezuelan people and that they decide themselves who rules Venezuela.
The imperialist United States and Donald Trump are trying to put Guaido in power thanks to a coup, in order to eradicate all what Venezuelans have gained through their fight. What we see now is a president that has not been elected, but suddenly appointed by imperialists, and we stand beside the people.
Leaders of the Caribbean community, CARICOM, have met with the United Nations to discuss the ongoing political situation in Venezuela. The prime ministers of St. Kitts and Nevis, Trinidad and Tobago, and Barbados held talks with UN Secretary General. Coming out of that meeting, the delegation said that if the conditions can be met, the UN will assist in establishing the roadmap towards peace and security for Venezuela and the region.
We are very satisfied that in the coming days we could work towards that dialogue so that the internal difficulties in Venezuela can be approached without intervention and without interference from those who may have a different approach. And hopefully in the not too distant future we can see significant improvements and the lessening of the tensions. So the meeting was very useful, and we will continue to work towards peace and security in the region.
Venezuela has also condemned the decision made by the Caribbean Professional Baseball Leagues Confederation to strip the country of the chance to host the Caribbean Series baseball tournament. The sport minister says this is another attack against the Bolivarian government directed from the U.S.
We denounce and condemn this decision of the Caribbean Professional Baseball Leagues Confederation that bows to the pressure generated by Major League Baseball as an action that adds to the coup against our homeland, directed by the U.S. government to overthrow a legitimate and constitutional government.
El Salvador is electing its new president this coming Sunday, with Nayib Bukele from the Ghana Party heading all the polls. Candidates closed their campaigns during the weekend.
Thousands of supporters of the FMLN party gather in one of the main avenues of capital San Salvador to show their support for the presidential candidacy of Hugo Martinez and Karina Sosa.
I think that in 10 years they have done more for the country than the Arena Party in 20. I believe they are the ones that are going to help our country.
At the rally, Martinez highlighted the social measures in his government program aimed at helping the poorest sector of the nation. He asked voters to choose the FMLN for a third term in office.
Justice means that all of our children can attend to school with their school supplies. That's what makes other candidates mad. Instead of offering justice, they are just offering fairy tales.
Candidate Nayib Bukele from the Ghana Party closed his presidential campaign in the historic center. He has promised his supporters he will end with same policies affecting the country.
We are tired of the same policies. It is always the same. He is the one who is going to make a difference.
Bukele is heading the polls. The candidate says he will win the election in the first round.
On the 3rd of February, we will leave the post-war period behind. That day, we are leaving behind the ones who do not want to move on, the ones who live in the past, the ones who are rich because we are poor. That day, they will hear the Salvadorians saying, "No more."
The right-wing party Arena canceled its traditional closing campaign at the Cuscatlán Stadium, but held a caravan called Success Tour. The presidential election will be held this Sunday, February 3rd.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. Central American migrants near the Mexico-U.S. border are considering their options as Washington prepares to start sending asylum seekers back to Mexico. Under a U.S. policy announced on December, the country will return non-Mexican migrants to Mexico while their asylum requests are being processed in the U.S. The migrants who haven't crossed the border yet are considering their alternatives, including asking for permission to work in Mexico.
If I were to go to the United States, it would be with a number. Now, when migrants realize asylum seekers are being returned to Mexico or to other countries like Guatemala or Honduras, when they hear this, my advice would be for them to wait. There needs to be time so things can be resolved. If we get work, we can work here, just like on the other side. We can work here. Whoever wants to work can work, wherever, not just in the United States. You can also work here and build a life.
At least 10 people have been killed in a shooting between two groups of community policing in Mexico. According to the government spokesperson, 2 other people were injured. The confrontation took place in the municipality of Chilapa in the state of Guerrero, one of the most violent places in the country due to drug cartels. 13 people have died and another 42 were injured after a building collapsed during a wedding in Peru. A wall at the hotel where the wedding took place burst due to heavy rains, bringing the whole roof down on the celebrating guests. Relatives of the victims are demanding justice. They want to know why the hotel continued operating when it had already been shut down twice before.
The hotel had been shut down twice. How did authorities allow the premises to continue operating? We only want justice to be served, and that this is not left unpunished.
1 person has been arrested and 1 injured during protests organized by indigenous groups. The police repressed the demonstration that took place in the province of Cotopaxi. Indigenous groups are protesting against the government's economic policies and the privatization of key sectors. A tornado has hit Cuba's capital, leaving at least 3 people dead and capital Havana without electricity. Officials said there are up to 178 people injured. The tornado hit during an extratropical cyclone. Most of the capital is still without power. Our correspondent in Cuba, Alien Fernandez, gives us more details.
The tornado has left a bleak picture here in the municipality of 10 de Octubre in Havana. The tornado left severe material damages. Locals were surprised by the strength of the tornado. Here we are standing by a car that crashed into a building. The owner of the car is here with us. Hello, can you tell us what happened?
Everything happened really fast. There was rubble coming from everywhere. I got hit in the face. I tried to cover myself up, and when I stopped, I went out of the car. Then I realized that the car crashed into this residential building.
The Cuban authorities continue to evaluate the situation in the affected areas. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel has visited several of these affected locations and met with his cabinet to evaluate the damages and work on a strategy to recover the areas.
We thank Alien Fernandez for that report. The death toll from Friday's dam collapse in Brazil has risen to 60, while 300 people remain missing. Our correspondent Brian Muir has the latest.
As search and rescue efforts continue in Brumadinho, Minas Gerais, the MAM social movement, which fights for sovereignty and autonomy over the Brazilian mining industry, is attributing this massive environmental crime to the federal government's relaxation of regulations last year, enabling mining companies to expand their activities. And as a result, it seems that this is not the only place where mining capacities have been overloaded, because on the 27th, the civil defense team evacuated an additional 24,000 people from areas adjacent to the disaster zone, saying that there's a second dam in the area, also owned by Valley Mining Corporation, which is also at risk of bursting. And subsequently they gave out some contradictory information, and the local residents are very worried and confused at the moment about how big this risk actually is. Meanwhile, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro took the opportunity of this disaster to reach out to Benjamin Netanyahu and invite the Israeli military into the disaster zone. So on January 28th, 136 Israeli soldiers arrived in the area with a lot of modern surveillance equipment for locating cell phones. And this move has been criticized by a lot of people in Brazil because, first of all, it seems like an expansion of Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu's reaching out to far-right governments around the world. It's not clear why the Israeli military is needed when there's 300,000 Brazilian military, many of whom have even more experience working in mudslide and building collapse situations, in part because of their work in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake.
We thank Brian Muir for that report. This Monday marks the anniversary of José Martí's birth. Let's take a look back at the life of the Cuban writer and politician.
The son of Spaniards, Mariano Martí and Leonor Pérez, José Julián Martí was born in Havana, Cuba on January 28, 1853. He devoted his entire life to fighting for independence and freedom for Cuba. At a very early age, his revolutionary ideas led him to be condemned and imprisoned after the Cuban-Spanish War in 1868, the first war for Cuban independence that Martí supported also with his writings. After a long journey through many Latin American countries, José Martí went back to Cuba temporarily in 1878. With his political ideas still in act, Martí started teaching. However, he was exiled again after he was arrested for having links with independentist movements. After that, he went to New York, where he established himself as a journalist. He also helped form the Cuban Revolutionary Committee, which was devoted to Cuban independence. In 1985, José Martí, together with the Cuban military chief, General Máximo Gómez, joined the revolutionary forces in Cuba that were fighting with Spanish troops. He was killed in the Dos Rios battle on May 19, 1895. Today, the 28th of January, is the anniversary of his birth, a poet, writer, and politician who fought with his life to achieve Cuban independence.
January 28th marks the official opening of the International Year of Indigenous Languages. The goal set by the UNESCO is to promote and protect these ancestral languages. It is estimated that there are around 6,700 indigenous languages in the world, but 40% of them are at risk of disappearing. Protecting these languages is key to maintain the culture of indigenous communities. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. Investigators in Nepal say the pilot of a plane that crashed last March may have had an emotional breakdown before the incident. The investigation report compiled by Nepalese officials also blames the crew's loss of situational awareness for the crash in Kathmandu. 51 out of the 71 people aboard U.S. Bangla Airlines flight were killed. 4 members of an anti-terrorism unit have been killed in an ambush by militants in northern Burkina Faso. The attack came a few hours after 10 civilians were killed by unidentified gunmen in the same area. Once seen as one of the safest countries in West Africa, Burkina Faso has witnessed a rise in attacks against civilians and soldiers by Al-Qaeda-linked insurgents. 2 men were sentenced in South Africa for the murder of a 16-year-old black teenager. The 2 men killed the boy after suspecting he was stealing sunflowers. They were sentenced with kidnapping, intimidation, theft, and pointing a firearm after a lengthy trial. Wildfires that broke out in Cape Town's Lionhead Mountain Sunday evening are still spreading. The fire is being fanned by strong winds and has come to a close to people's homes. But so far, no casualties have been reported, and firefighters are working to contain the blazes.
We're just walking with my girlfriend and we saw that big fire, so we got closer and people started to get involved to stop it, so we decided to join the movement. And so they said, get towels, wet towels, and hit the fire. this is what we've been doing for the last 2 hours.
The Nigerian Bar Association has directed its members to boycott courts across the country in protest against the suspension of the country's top judge by the president. The Chief Justice was suspended after being investigated for allegedly not disclosing assets. The suspension has, however, raised eyebrows in the political arena, as it has happened barely weeks before crucial general elections.
The reason we are here is to protest against the acts of rascality and iniquity perpetrated on Nigerians and the judiciary by the President Muhammadu Buhari. That's why we are here, to say no to impunity, to say no to illegality, and to demand a reversal of that act of unconstitutionality.
A traditional dhow sailing boat made entirely of trash and flip-flops has set off an expedition along the Kenyan coast. Its creators hope to raise awareness about the harmful effects of plastic waste. The UN estimates that more than 8.3 billion tons of plastic has been produced globally since the early 1950s. About 60% of it has ended up in landfills or in the natural environment.
We had this dream of doing a recycled plastic dhow, as today the world is so much crying about the plastic, and we feel it's our responsibility, to make this solution, because we are polluting our environment. Many creatures today are suffering about this jungle of plastic.
Protests against the Yellow Vest movement took place in the streets of Paris. We have the details on that and other stories and news from around the world.
In France, Red Scarf protesters have marched to condemn the violence in the Yellow Vest movement. Thousands turned out for Sunday's counter-demonstration, a day after an 11th consecutive Saturday of Yellow Vest demonstrations. The News Citizens movement started online. Afghanistan's president has announced the foreign forces in the country will not be staying there long term. He made the remarks after Washington announced it was committed to the withdrawal of their soldiers from Afghanistan after 17 years of war.
The presence of foreign forces in Afghanistan is based on a bilateral international agreement. No Afghan wants foreign troops in their country for the long term, but the current presence of foreign forces is based on need, and this need is always being contemplated and will be contemplated based on how many foreign forces there are in Afghanistan. And according to an exact and arranged plan, we are trying to bring down that number to 0.
A UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial executions has met with Turkey's Foreign Affairs Minister to discuss the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The UN delegation probing the murder is also expected to meet with the Justice Minister and Chief Prosecutor. Khashoggi, a columnist for the Washington Post, was killed and dismembered at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on October the 2nd.
Hundreds of taxis blocked one of Madrid's main roads as protests against online app-based companies continue. Our correspondent in Madrid, Eduardo Marin, has the latest.
More than 2,000 taxi drivers blocked one of the main avenues in the Spanish capital, Madrid, during their 7th day of strike. They are protesting against app taxi services like Uber and Cabify. Moments after blocking the road, the demonstrators were dispersed by the police, so what they're doing is to drive through this avenue and honking their horn. What taxi drivers are claiming is that authorities are not following the law, since more drivers than allowed working for these apps are circulating. After 7 days of strike, drivers' unions are trying to negotiate with the authorities of Madrid, although nothing has come out of it yet.
We thank Edu Marin for that report. And ahead of the Super Bowl, 2 teams of puppets are getting ready to compete in their own big game. For the 15th year in a row, 93 dogs from 50 shelters are participating in the Puppy Bowl, which promotes pet adoption. The 2-hour event includes the Lombardi Trophy, a kiss cam, and the Kitty Halftime Show.
She calls it canine.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.